Medications for opioid use disorders in correctional settings. Shifting the paradigm, creating a balanced correctional and rehabilitative approach. The Opioid Response Network is funded by SAMHSA to provide resources and technical assistance needed locally to address the opioid crisis. This video is part of a series to provide guidance on the implementation of medications for opioid use disorder in correctional facilities. Leading corrections and behavioral health experts present information on topics such as the use of medication, models of delivery, diversion, and linkages to care and community support. An interview with Daryl Mcgraw, C4 Innovations.
So peer support is my favorite topic to talk about. I like to talk about peer support because for number one, it was peer support, and we do it every day in our natural life. Everyone has some peer or someone that they confide in. And it's interesting that when we start to talk about treatment for addiction and mental health, and we start to talk about peer support, it's not a recognized, it's, even though there's data out there, maybe not a lot, but, I always tell people, I always say, I'm your evidence-based practice. Everybody's looking for an EVP. I'm your evidence-based practice. I've tried this. This was my journey. I can tell you that this actually worked for me. So it's interesting when you're trying to convince medical or clinical people the importance that it's not just MAT is great. It's not for everyone. It's not the golden bullet, but with anything that we're offering individuals that are struggling in addiction, if we're not offering recovery supports, meaning peer support and dealing with the trauma, like trauma is significant. It was for me, it wasn't until I identified that I had an issue with trauma that once I found out that trauma was my main issue, that's when the drugs, I stopped using drugs. It wasn't a problem. Putting down the drugs was easy, and there's a lot of times that we don't, we just want to, okay, so we're going to give you MAT, but we're not going to talk about the trauma. We're not going to talk about the homelessness. We're not going to talk about employment. We're not going to talk about all the other things that may be the reason why an individual has chosen to use substances. I know for me, it was a numbing effect. So I wanted to numb the fact that my dad had left when I was 6 years old. I wanted to numb the fact that I've never felt good enough because maybe it was me the reason why he left, or growing up not having a car for all. Our family didn't have a car. So poverty, all these different things that I was trying to numb for many years, only to find out that when I actually peeled the onion back, none of those things were my issue, were my fault. But I had to deal with them, and I had to identify them first before I could move forward.
Is the impact of trauma and its role in substance use properly recognized as a reason individuals enter correctional settings?
When I think about trauma, I've been talking about the ACEs studies for a long time and the importance of the ACEs study, going through and doing the ACEs studies with inmates that are incarcerated, because we could start to identify their trauma issues. If we were able to do that, then they could decide what type of programming should be inside the institutions. Because, okay, so some of these programs are great, but if we're not addressing trauma, we're not identifying trauma when a person comes in, then that person leaves still traumatized. And in prison, for me, I know it was a traumatizing situation. So for us not to be dealing with it and not addressing it, I don't feel like there's talk about it, but I don't feel like there's enough action. I feel like there's billions of dollars that are coming out right now to fight the opioid crisis and all the things that are going on with addiction and addiction world and mental health. But nobody's saying, okay, we're going to set aside this amount of money just to address the trauma and homelessness and all the other issues that lead people down the path of addiction.
What do you tell people who say, you can't coddle people in jail, they are there to be punished?
So I know a lot of times people would say we can't coddle, or I've had staff say, well, I'm not a social worker, or I'm not here to baby people. They broke the law, and we're here, I'm here to punish them. And I would go back to say, that's not your job. Punishment is not your job. Safety and security is your job. But as a human being, we need to be able to connect with people, and it might be something that you do, right? I wish that in my perfect world, I wish that people would say, like, I went fishing yesterday. A CEO said that to me one day. He says, "Hey, McGraw, you know what I did the other day?" And I was like, "No, what?" He said, "I went fishing." And I was like, "Okay, did you catch a fish? Did you?" And he was like, "No, that's it." And it didn't dawn on to me until a few years later what he was really saying. That was life. It wasn't about, life is just that simple. And so I would go back to this thinking about, like, it's not about coddling, because one thing we know for sure, 95% of the people that are incarcerated are coming home. And we're not responsible for how they go in, but as a community and as people that live in this community, we should be responsible for how they come home.
Do you have hope that people will receive treatment that they need while incarcerated?
Well, I think that I would love to see everything change. And then when you talk to a lot of people, advocates and activists, they think that the criminal justice system should be dismantled and then changed around. And I agree to a certain extent, because in order for us to really change the criminal justice system, we have to deal with the racial disparities, right? Where there are black and brown people make up the majority of the people in prison, but only make up 12 to 14% of the people in the country. So how do they make up the majority of these people? And then when you look at the numbers of black and brown people that are doing life sentences, we're talking about not only these individuals doing life sentences, but these are the missing men and women from our communities. They're the dads and moms and brothers, sisters, sons, and daughters that are missing from these communities. So we really need to take a look at how do we prepare, these people. I believe, like, for me, my goal is, every time, I wake up and I tell God, I'm like, I want to help people get out and stay out. It's not, that's what I set my mind to do, is try my best to help people get out and stay out. People do break the law. People do make choices. Today I heard something where someone said about making choices based on survival, and I can relate to that. And a lot of people can't. If you're on the other side of that coin and you didn't grow up that way, you didn't grow up in a single parent home, where poverty and violence is all surrounded you, and a lot of things. A lot of people didn't grow up that way, so they don't understand how some people can find themselves in these situations.
Do you feel there is a lack of cultural competence in the judicial system, law enforcement, and correctional settings?
Oh, I think that, yeah, absolutely. I have an opportunity to do some trainings on implicit bias, and we talk about what people actually bring into the workplace, right? Where they grew up, what they know, and sometimes you don't even recognize that you're being biased based off of your belief system, right? So if we have individuals who are working in a criminal justice system, whether it be a prosecutor, a public defender, a judge, a corrections officer, a police officer, and they have some sort of implicit bias that they're not even recognizing, this is how we find our criminal justice system filled with people that look like me and not so much people that look like maybe the arresting officer, if you will.
How can we combat implicit bias?
Like, if you get someone who really knows it and teaches it, I mean, like, been very fortunate to be in a lot of really good rooms. It's like stuff that people don't think about. Like, well, when you judge people, like, I'm wearing a purple suit, right? Some people say, who wears a purple suit? But for me, I like it. You know what I mean? But because I've been in places where I didn't really care about what I wore, right? And maybe I didn't dress so nice and I didn't smell so good. And now today I get to put on something that I feel really good in, and I feel like I look good and I smell good. And those things are very important to me today. But there was a time in my life that there wasn't. And I remember one time I was working in a residential facility, and one guy, he came, I was walking in and I was like strutting my stuff, right? And the guy was like, "You think you're the shit. You think you're all of that." And I was like, "You're absolutely right." And he looked at me with his mouth open. He's like, you work here. You're not supposed to talk like that." I was like, you're absolutely right. I do think I'm all that." And he said, I said, "Because you know what? There was a time in my life I didn't think I was anything." And then it just was like, him and I are very good friends right now. And, I always, I think that, we have to be our own biggest champions. So I'm always like walking around with my own theme song in my head. And I'm just like, because if you don't cheer yourself on, unfortunately, we just recently lost Kobe Bryant. And one of the things that he says, aim to be great. And, what an impact he made on for me and other people. Like, number one, he excelled in his craft, but he took it a step further. He could have just been a really good basketball player, right? But he took it a step further and really tried to cheer people on and make them want to be great. And I'm inspired. I get to sit here today and talk about how inspirational that was.
What do you do in your day-to-day work?
During the day, like I get to wear multiple hats in the state of Connecticut. I am a criminal justice advocate, activist. I do a lot of consulting. I do some consulting with C4, Center for Innovation, and do technical assistance. And I go around the country and I talk to people around the country who are looking to create maybe recovery community organizations or implement peer support. I also work with people who are interested in implementing peer support or criminal justice, like working in the criminal justice world and how to utilize peers. So I have the best job in the world. And then I also spend 3 days of my week working for the Institute of Municipal Policy and Research at Central Connecticut University. And there I'm a policy research analyst. So we really get into the weeds of policies and working with legislators to try to really, my focus is reentry. So educating people and legislators and community leaders on the importance of reentry and how to build this seamless system that people, that are coming home and we get to work with the Department of Corrections and we get to say, talk about like in reach instead of 60 days, we really should be talking to people a year or maybe six months. I mean, we believe that reentry should start at the day of arrest, right? And those are the things that are super important. And how do we connect people upon the time they get arrested to really start working on their reentry journey? And hopefully that I get to influence the rest of the world like that. But right now I'm just in Connecticut and other places that will have me.
If you looked back to the person you were before you entered recovery and saw that this was your future, what would he think?
If I was looking back on May 7th, well, you know what? I have to think about it. If I was looking back on May 7th, I was hopeless. I believe that, I knew inside of me there was an opportunity to be really successful at recovery. I wasn't sure about how to go about it. I knew it was possible, but I didn't know about how to go about it. I believed it. I seen other people like walk away from drug use and start businesses and things, but I wasn't sure if that was for me. And but it wasn't until that day that I realized that I was quite successful. I had numerous opportunities. I was working at a pretty decent job. I was a self-sabotager. I found myself, I was a manager at a position. I was actually talking to the lady in the hallway because I used to be an executive housekeeper. So I used to be in charge of housekeeping in hotels. And I was pretty good at it. I was really good at it. But I couldn't get out of my own way. I couldn't stop using, drugs. And that was the one thing. And when I got arrested on May 7th, 2007, and I was incarcerated, I wrote a 5-year plan. And I read the book, Purpose Driven Life by Rick Warren, which started me on creating this 5-year plan. And I realized that drugs were the common denominator. Every time I've been arrested, every time I was incarcerated, either I was going to get drugs had something to do with it. So I said to myself, if I take drugs out of the equation, what will happen? What will my life be like? And I haven't used drugs since May 7, 2007, and I haven't been in prison since. But it's a lot of work, for the clinical people. I guess I'm in the maintenance stage, right? But it's a full-time job full-time job of just maintaining and trying to do the next right thing.
How do you use your experience to advocate for the needs of those with substance use disorders? Do you go to prisons and talk to people, or do you train others to do that?
I am so very fortunate and blessed that I have an opportunity to go into a level 4 prison. I've been going into a level 4 prison for approximately like 3 years now, and we do a group called the Way Out group. And in that group, is the majority of people are serving what's considered in Connecticut life sentence. So people that have been serving more than 20 years, 25 years. Many of the men have 50, 60. Some people have natural life, 100-year sentences. It's about 35 people in the group, and we meet once a week for 12 months, right? So we meet pretty consistently. And they like me and they respect me because the prison that I go to is the prison that I was in. So I can relate to being in what we call the Green Mile, which is like a lower under the ground part of the prison, and then actually making it out, because a lot of times these guys don't see someone actually make it out. And if they see you make it out, no one ever comes back. And I go back every week, and I sometimes I talk about, just like next week, I'll talk about being in Rhode Island at a presentation with a purple suit on, and they envision themselves that way. And my job is to give them hope, right? And one of the things that I'm sure they're tired of me saying is that I talk most about the pebbles and the boulders, right? The boulders are things that we can see. I know that can jam me up. I know I can get, so we can move around the boulders. But the pebbles are the little things that we didn't think about, like riding with someone in a car who may have an unregistered, or that, connecting with someone and not knowing where they just came from. And so I had a friend who got in a car, was getting a ride home. That person had just robbed a bank. He didn't realize it. That was his luck. But just the pebbles, right? And that's kind of a boulder, but the pebbles are like the things that you don't think about that could honestly end you back up in prison. I always tell guys, you got to have a plan A, a plan B, C, D, and sometimes an E, right? And a lot of times in the prison system, we don't give guys a plan. We don't encourage them to plan. And it's sad, because they're like, when I go in there and I'm like, so what's your plan? How many guys got a 5-year plan? Maybe 2 people raise their hand, and here's this opportunity. I say, when we were kids, we used to go timeout, right? And you can tie your shoe or whatever it is. I'm like, this is a timeout. This is an opportunity for you to plan your life. You can do anything. You can be anything that you want to be. And this is the time to do that. And many don't take advantage of it. So it's my goal to go in there and hopefully encourage them to do so. And I was with a guy yesterday who was in my group, and now he's out and he's a real estate agent, and to see him in a suit and to him, like, we just hugged, and it was amazing, because that's my guy.
Technical assistance is available to support the evidence-based prevention, treatment, and recovery of opioid use disorder. To request technical assistance, visit opioidresponsenetwork.org.